I'm not interested in your friends in high places, and I don't trust politicians.
Now, if we listened to you, we'd still be rolling drunks for a living.
Are you broke?
You'll carry that stink of the streets with you the rest of your life.
I like this thing of the streets. It makes me feel good. I like the smell of it. It opens up my lungs.
Hey guys, I'm Kevin.
I'm Jake.
And this is Movie Matters. And we have a special guest here today. You want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Daniel. Kevin and Jake's friend.
Yeah, definitely happy to have you on. So today we're talking about Once Upon a Time in America from 1984, Sergio Leone. Daniel and I actually watched this movie together and with another friend, so we thought it'd be cool to have him on the podcast today and share our thoughts, because I've never seen this movie, and Jake, you haven't either, right?
I think I've seen bits and pieces, maybe when I was like in high school, but I don't think I sat through this entire movie before.
Yeah. And Daniel, you've seen this movie how many times?
So I've seen this movie twice. I went through like sort of a mob movie phase, you could say, like 3 or 4 years ago, and watched a ton of mob movies, and then I found this one and I was like, I really want to watch it. And then I did, but the one I watched was the US release. So I think that was like the 3-hour, 45-minute one, I believe, right? Where it was like a, considerably shorter than the European release, which I think is like 4 hours and 11 minutes.
Yeah, so I read a lot about that. So again, Sergio Leone, he's famous for the Man with No Name trilogy, Good, the Bad, the Ugly, Fistful of Dollars, all those movies. He did Once Upon a Time in the West, which I've actually never seen, which is on my list to watch very soon, because I hear it's a masterpiece. This movie, apparently, like, the total footage ran 8 to 10 hours, which is insane.
Yeah, that's what I heard.
makes sense, because this movie is very long. So for the people who are listening and watching, we all watched the director's cut that was over 4 hours long. This is definitely our longest movie to date, and also kind of ironic because I've vocally been complaining about how long movies are lately on this podcast.
Yeah.
But the editor, Nino Baragli, he trimmed the footage to around 6 hours with the plan of releasing the film as 2 3-hour movies, which would have been interesting. The producers refused this idea, and Leone had to further cut down the film to 3 hours and 49 minutes. And then apparently that they... Sergio Leone was initially contracted to deliver a 165-minute movie, so 2 hours and 45 minutes. Instead, he delivered one that was 229 minutes. And so they contracted Zack Steinberg to edit this film down to 144 minutes, which is crazy, for the U.S. release. And it was released in the U.S. with that cut, like just about 2 hours and 14 minutes or so, 20 minutes, 2 hours 20 minutes, and a lot of the cast was pissed, and so was Sergio Leone, and this hurt the box office. This hurt its Oscar possibilities. So it's really interesting. This is a very interesting film. I'm curious how the theatrical cut would be. What do you guys think?
You've got to be missing so much context to things, like, because like a lot of the actual like action in this movie, and I mean action in terms of like key plot events, are surrounded by like 15 minutes of context on either side, and like they're only actually maybe like a minute or two of like key dialogue or like a key thing that happens between characters. So yeah, I don't know how, like, I was actually thinking about this the other night as I was going to bed, because I've had a few days to kind of process the movie now. Yeah. And I was like, how would I have cut this movie down and I couldn't think of any good places to really remove anything.
Yeah.
Where like we've talked a lot about that in this podcast, and we've all had things that we would cut out of some of the movies that we watched, but this one's really like everything's just very meticulously important to either the plot directly or to set up those big plot moments. There's maybe like one or
agreed.
two things I'd cut out, but it's like 5 minutes total, so like it's not even worth it. you know,
and
like
and it sort of makes you think, like, if they're going to cut anything out, you know, they're probably going to have to cut out like full, it's like flashback or flash forward scenes, pretty much, and you know, like you said, you'd like miss a lot of the context of, you know, like the message and the like deeper, how could you say, like theme of Once Upon a Time in America.
right.
Yeah. Yeah, we talked about that, Daniel, when we watched it with our other friend Brandon. We were like, we were just like, this movie can only be 4 hours, which is insane. And
Yeah.
I mean, throughout the movie, I kept being like, all right, guys, we're like an hour in. All right, we're 2 hours in. All right, we're 3 hours in. And honestly,
Yeah, you're giving us some milestones.
yeah, it wasn't horrible watching it. Like, I wasn't terribly bored. I didn't love the movie, and I want to hear all your guys' opinions on if you liked the movie or not. I didn't love the movie. I didn't hate it. I enjoyed it. I'm glad I've watched it. It's a masterpiece for sure. Like, the camera work alone, I mean, I said this a bunch of times while watching it to Daniel and Brandon. I was like, this movie is, like, gorgeous, and it's so well shot. Like, and the set design. And I told everyone, I was like, you know, it takes place in multiple time periods. And like in the 30s, I was like, this feels like it was literally shot in 1930s New York, which was so cool. And like, you can't really say that about a lot of movies these days. And that makes it stand above and among a bunch of amazing movies.
Yeah, like I feel like a lot of period pieces are all shot on like the same exact set at like Universal or something, you know, and like you can tell that it's like that same road. They just like refaced some of the buildings or whatever, you know, but like this was like they must have had to reconstruct like entire like city blocks to film this, because it's like immaculately done, like you said. Yeah, the camera work is incredible. Yeah, you talked about like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and Fistful of Dollars, and the westerns that Sergio Leone has done in the past before this movie. Those are all epic westerns, and like you get a lot of those big landscape wide shots, and you know, like it really puts you in that setting. And this movie does the same thing in an urban context to like incredible effect, and does that same thing where it has these beautiful wide shots that set up the context, and then they pan in to like the actual characters doing their thing, or cut in. But like the one scene that comes to mind is when they're children and kind of walking through that super crowded street, and it's like a high shot, and it like comes down and like finds them in the crowd, which is just so cool.
Yeah.
And very like reminiscent of that like Western epic kind of filmmaking that he's, you know, obviously super known for.
Yeah. And so did you like it, Jake?
I did like it. I'm kind of in the same boat as you. I was actually like horribly sick when I watched it on Sunday. I was in bed all day, and I was like, I'm not gonna get a better time, you know, to watch this week. So I just watched it. I was a little worried because, you know, not feeling well and trying to sit through a 4-hour movie is not always, you know, the best idea. But I was like extremely engaged through the entire movie, which I thought was going to be a challenge, and surprisingly was not. So that was very good. And yeah, glad I watched it. It's obviously a phenomenally made film. Don't know if I'll ever watch it again. Just like the time investment is just like, I feel like the payoff isn't quite there. But I am glad I watched it.
Yeah, and I think that's a great segue to Daniel because you've seen it twice.
Yeah, yeah, I have.
So tell us your thoughts.
So I'd probably say between like the U.S. release and the European release versions, the European release, like with the, how do you say, like restored footage that they had and they try to digitize or however they do it. I feel like everything that they restored and added to the European release at least didn't really seem necessary, I guess. And kind of going back to what you said, Jake, like, what are they going to choose to cut out of the movie and what do they keep in? And pretty much all the scenes they have in the European release, at least in my opinion, it kind of feels like they probably didn't have to put that in there. But overall, I really liked it. I would say between this and Godfather 1, it's probably one of my favorite mob movies of all time, which I know is a pretty big thing to say, right? Because you have Goodfellas, you have Casino, which I still haven't seen.
I know.
Probably going to watch that this weekend, I think.
Good.
But, yeah, and kind of like what you were saying, Kevin, about how, and I think we were talking about this with Brandon, how basically, like, I think it was when they were kids, and basically they're just walking through the streets of New York, and how like old it looks. You could say like how like Art Deco, well, not Art Deco exactly, but like how much of like old America, old New York it looks. They did a really good job with that, and I have no idea how the hell they even like filmed it. It didn't really look like that they used any sort of like prop sets or anything like that. I think they probably just went to like some really rundown old neighborhood or something like that, and then just chose to like film there. And then also kind of thinking if this film released in 1984, at least it's more possible they'd find buildings like that back then versus now where you pretty much couldn't. But yeah, they did a really, really good job at like doing it not really as a period piece, but like getting the periods correct every time jump or flashback or something like that. I thought that was really good. And then trying to think what else. I kind of want to talk about the whole like dream theory, I guess, with the whole movie. I don't know if you guys had anything else you wanted to say before we get to that.
Yeah, I do want to ask you one question. Have you seen the Man with No Name trilogy? Have you seen that? The Good, the Bad, the Ugly? Okay, I didn't think you did. Mm-hmm. So they're all really good. Good spaghetti western. So add that to your list. I do own them, so if you want to come by and watch them, we can do that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, my 3 favorite westerns. They're so good.
Yeah. Yeah, so get into that dream theory, because that dream theory is very interesting, and I wonder if you've heard that, Jake.
I have not. So
okay, cool.
I purposely didn't look up anything about the movie so I could be surprised by anything Kevin brought up.
Yeah, so like the dream theory. So I'd probably say like, I don't even know where to start, I guess, with it. So I guess I'll tell you what the dream theory is, and I'll try to like explain like, does it make sense, does it not make sense? So basically the dream theory is, when the movie first starts, I believe, we see 2 henchmen. One of them, I think, is supposed to look like an older version of Cockeye, which is one of Noodles or Robert De Niro's, how you could say, like gang members or, part of their group. And then another individual. And basically they're in this opium house, they're looking for Noodles. And, I believe there's a scene, I think this happens twice. I think in the beginning, you see Noodles basically smoking opium and then like, sort of getting high. And we see that again happen at the very end of the movie. And because of all the time jumps, basically, you go from like the very beginning, which is really, you could say like probably when Noodles is in his like late 20s, early 30s or something like that. That's when the movie starts. And then the movie also ends at that same like sort of age period. And the idea is that basically the movie ends sort of how it started, in that everything that we see in the movie never actually happened. Trying to see how kind of explain this better. So, like,
It's an opium-filled dream scenario of
yeah, basically, yeah, like sort of like a
he
really
dreamt
big
all this.
opium trip.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and if you look at it this way too, at that point in the story, Max has already, spoiler warning, obviously for anyone who hasn't seen it, but at this point, Noodles has already tipped the police into, like basically saying like, hey, this, my friend Max, or this guy I know named Max, is staging this robbery at the federal bank, and Noodles does this to help save his friend, so that he doesn't get killed, just so that he goes into prison for a few years and he forgets about this whole thing. And as we see later on in the movie, basically in the opium house, when they're looking for him, he ends up leaving. He goes back to like their hangout, and pretty much it kind of goes from there. And then later on, I don't remember how early it was in the movie. I want to say it was either like when the first hour, maybe first 2 hours or something like that, we see Max's body, and we also do see like a newspaper, with like Max Berkovitz, and then some of the other gang members says like killed in attempted robbery or something like that. Noodles goes back to the crime scene and then sees 3 bodies all laid out, and one of the bodies isn't Max, basically. And when Noodles
The one
sees the
that's,
body,
like,
he doesn't
burnt to total shit is supposed to be Max. Yeah.
Yeah, it's supposed to be Max, but it's actually like a body double. And this isn't really confirmed until we get to the end of the movie, where
It takes a while to
Noodles-
get there.
Yeah, right. It takes about 3.5 more hours to get there. Yeah, and so basically, he goes to Max's or Senator Bailey's mansion, and then has a conversation, and then Max basically says that not only the syndicate but also the cops helped him sort of like stage his own death or fake his own death. And I guess like looking back to, I guess this would technically be a flash forward, because I guess this is like old DeNiro. He gets that letter, and then he basically finds out like, oh crap, someone knows my identity, and then that's what sort of motivates him to go on this sort of like how do you say, like journey, if you will, into his past, and then to find out who sent him the letter and who knows who he actually is and what he's done. And when he finds that person, who knows what he's going to do, But obviously, if you've committed a lot of crimes, murder, grand larceny, things like that, I mean, he probably doesn't want that information coming out,
Right. Yeah.
But,
Among other things,
Yeah.
too.
yeah, and sort of
Yeah,
like
it
how
defiles
the,
women, unfortunately.
dream theory sort of works, if you look at it this
Yeah,
way.
the-
So basically, like,
The list is pretty extensive.
yeah, I know. Yeah, it's a long one, and I kind of feel like you'd have to. I'd almost say you'd have to watch the movie twice, but that's asking a lot. It's a huge time
And
sink. But go ahead.
And I think I even said that when we finished it. I was like, man, this movie, like, you almost need to watch this movie twice to really get it. But it's just like, that's 8 hours of your life. So it's a little,
just
it's
gone. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if I'm going to ever watch it again. I mean, I own it on Blu-ray, and we watched it on Blu-ray. It looked great. Maybe in like another 5 to 10 years I'll watch it again, but we'll see. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely not the movie that, you would just like throw on or whatever it is, in the background to watch, or like, oh, I'm feeling like watching some mob movie, so let me just watch Once Upon a Time in America, and then you just burn, 4 hours of time. But, I guess, so, yeah, because I saw it like, I think 4 years ago or something like that for the first time. And when I first watched it, I actually wasn't fully aware of the whole dream theory. I sort of just like knew that it was this like really good mob movie made by by Sergio Leone, and I was like, okay, that'd be really cool to watch, and I did. And then the ending sort of like really threw me off, and it's not the scene with like Max disappearing, which I'll get into here in a sec, but it's actually when, at the very, very last scene, basically we see Max when he's like late 20s, early 30s or something like that, just like we saw in the beginning of the movie, walk into the opium house, light up, smoke, and then, he rolls over onto his back and he stares up at the camera, and then you see this like sort of like sick and like bitter smile, if you could say, on his face. And when I first saw that, I was just like, that's really weird. Like, is he like, and then I thought about like to the beginning of the movie, and I'm like, wait, was he just high this whole time? And then this is sort of like a trip, but then I was just like, no, like it can't be like, that conspiracy or something like that. So then I looked online, and then I saw that like other people were also saying that there's like this theory, and then I was just like, oh, okay, that makes more sense now. And again, it wasn't really till I saw that scene that I thought that it was a dream. It was sort of like, I just thought, he's smoking opium, he's like really high. That's, I guess, what it is.
Yeah,
sorry, I kind of lost my point here.
I could see the quote unquote future version being a dream sequence, that he's high and imagining this future where Max is actually still alive, and he can kind of relieve himself of the guilt of getting him killed. Yeah, I could see that. Because that's kind of one of the major drivers through that the like 60s sequence is his like crushing guilt for having gotten his friends killed. So yeah, like and if he comes up with this fantasy, maybe that's why he has the kind of sick smile at the end.
That he's almost satisfied with the outcome of, like, in a sense, redeeming himself.
Yeah, which
I don't know, it's
kind of
interesting.
also tracks because he's such a degenerate.
Yeah.
Like, he could kind of fool himself into thinking that he's absolved, by this fantasy. I don't know.
So I read that Sergio Leone suggested himself that the events of the 1960s depicted in the film are nothing more than an opium-fueled dream of Noodles, DeNiro. And he hinted that the final scene could suggest that, and because opium users usually report experiencing vivid fantasies which tend to explore the user's past and future. That's what I read. So pretty interesting that could be true. And I didn't mean to interrupt you, Daniel. What were you going to say?
Oh, yeah. No worries at all. So, like, yeah, it didn't really... I feel like the movie really never made it any more clear that... It didn't really, like, confirm this theory or anything like that, or wasn't sort of like... it was nothing like Inception, right? Where, obviously there's that concept of, like, a dream within a dream, or, that what, these people are experiencing isn't actually happening. And, yeah, so pretty much throughout the whole movie, it seems pretty real, that you could say, and then obviously like when you get to the very last scene, Noodles basically smokes opium. He looks up at the camera, and then like there's this pretty, longish shot, at least, the shot's there at least long enough for it to communicate some sort of message to the audience that there might be something more. And yeah, during my first watch, I thought it was like completely real, that everything that was happening was actually happening. And on our second watch, I actually did notice one more thing that sort of helped confirm that sort of like dream theory, if you will. It's basically it's when Max is probably, or not Max, Noodles is, I don't know, I think at this point he's probably at least in his late 30s. This is probably like, after he did his time in prison. He goes to visit Deborah again, and, basically he R-words her, or, essays her. I don't know if, like, we're allowed
You
to say,
can say
like,
it. It's okay.
Okay, so he okay, yeah. So basically Noodles rapes her.
Yeah. It's not great. We don't condone
No.
this, people. But
No.
but you can say the word.
Okay, good. Thank you. And obviously not good, but thank you, Kevin. But yeah, so and yeah, like that scene is like just really, really horrific too, because it's not
It's
something
brutal.
that like and I remember seeing it for the first time, like 4 years ago, and like I don't know if it was lengthened or anything like that for the European release, but I remember seeing the American one, and it just like felt like it went on for way too long, and and I'm sure that was probably the intention here, right? But it's still like it just like I just kind of wanted it to just to fucking stop, because like
Oh yeah, of course.
I don't know how long
Super
it lasts.
uncomfortable and gross.
It feels like at least it feels like eternity, but
It's definitely.
I think it's probably like
minutes.
5 minutes. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
in the minutes, and it's something that like if they wanted to do it, in a more, how you could say, like palpable, more like easier to take in way, they could have just like done something where it was actually like very strongly implied, but not like
Yeah. Right.
showing this whole thing happen.
Yeah, but I think
And-
it lends to Noodles' character and how,
Yeah.
like Jake said, a degenerate he is, and just like how he doesn't know how to be a normal, civilized person.
Yeah.
And that's
Like-
that's actually a good point. I'm sorry, Jake, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, like, throughout the movie, like there's kind of this like dichotomy where the gang and sometimes Noodles in particular are kind of glorified, or like the gang, like any mob movie, there's kind of this like all these badasses are like being badasses,
Yeah.
But then like they really bring you back down. It's like, oh yeah, these guys are like total scumbag, like degenerate pieces of shit. Like,
Yeah.
and some of mob movies don't do that.
Yeah, great point.
Or they kind of brush that away. And like this, I feel like they really tried to keep this grounded, from that aspect where like you're constantly reminded that these people are criminals, and they're not just like, robbing, stagecoaches or like drunks on the street. Like they're doing really bad shit, even from like early on. So it's kind of that dichotomy is pretty present throughout the entire film.
Yeah, and I think the epitome of that is, there's a scene that epitomizes that, and that's where Bugsy is coming after them in like that alleyway, and Noodles stabs him and kills him, and then
Oh,
stabs
and the
and
cop.
kills the cop, or stabs the
Yeah.
cop. And I think that just shows it's like, oh, like, yeah, he got this guy that you wanted to kill, but then, oh no, he stabs this cop, where it's like, like, that's not cool. And I think
and
that plays that
he's
line.
completely indiscriminate in that sequence.
Yeah.
Like it
Yeah.
like
It's like the
probably if
rage
one of
has
his
blinded
own
him.
guys had come over, he probably would have stabbed them too. Like,
Yeah.
it's like you really get to see his like
It's
that
like psychosis
aspect
almost.
of his being really comes through in that sequence, and like is definitely there. But he's also an interesting character because there are times where he does kind of seem at least hesitant about some of the stuff they're doing. Maybe not quite remorseful, but like the big one is after they kill the diamond guys. he's kind of like, why the fuck did we do that? You know, but like, it's not really clear if he's more just doesn't want the heat from doing that, or if he's like, why'd we have to kill these guys?
That scene is awesome, by
and
the
he
way.
just got out of prison
Which,
too.
yeah,
at
it
that
is.
time.
Yeah.
Right,
Not
yeah.
not trying to go back in, you know.
Yeah, he puts the gun
Right.
to the guy while he's looking at the diamond, puts it right up to that, and shoots him.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
it's so cool.
Yeah, that was a
Yeah,
really sick scene.
Violence isn't cool, people.
No.
Well, yeah,
Movie
obviously.
violence is.
Yeah, movie violence. It's a different story. Yeah.
But yeah,
But,
I mean, he's a pretty complex character, even though he's kind of a one-dimensional criminal, which is, I think, why this movie's pretty compelling. And Max is a pretty deep character as well. And like the two of them together, I think are very interesting. Because their motivations are very different in why they're doing this.
Yeah, I mean, this movie is rated number 87 on the top 250 movies on IMDb, so it's super highly
Really?
rated. Personally, I mean, I love De Niro. I'll watch anything he's in for the most part. His newer movies are okay, but I mean, that's what happens when you get old. You get lazy and you want to make money. And I really don't like James Woods as an actor. He's kind of annoying. Daniel, when you watch Casino, you'll realize why James Woods is fucking annoying. He's so annoying in that movie.
Really?
But that's his character. Oh yeah, but that's his character. So, yeah,
I thought he was great in this.
Yeah,
I mean,
I thought he was
he's
really.
he's good.
Yeah.
He's good.
Yeah, and also, like Jake, I also want to kind of like go back to kind of what you were saying about Noodles and how he's like a really sick character. Or maybe Kevin. I'm not sure if you might have said this too. Actually, that I guess him raping Deborah isn't. I mean, it took me by surprise because I didn't expect him to do something like that. I mean, obviously I know this guy's like a piece of shit, but I didn't expect him to like hurt the love of his life. His childhood love, you could say, right? But there's a scene when Noodles is a kid and he's taking a shit, and I think it was Pegula or something like that. Peggy, I think it was her name. Peggy. Yeah, and she walks him, sees him, and then he like still tries to like make a pass at it, although he has like his pants down. He was,
And then she tries to take a shit.
yeah, and then also like there's another scene too where, I think this is when Noodles loses his virginity, but I'm not exactly sure about Max at this point. But anyway, they go to see Pegula, or rather they blackmail the cop, by taking a picture of him when he's fucking her, and then basically Max and Noodles take turns. You can kind of see in Peggy's reaction that she really doesn't want to, or she's really not like enjoying this with Noodles. But then you see when Max goes and has sex with Peggy, that she's way more into it than she was with Noodles. And that's also sort of like a theme that we see happen between like pretty much all of Noodles' like love interests, let's say first with Peggy and then later on with Deborah at the very end. I want to say there might have been like one more love interest in the middle. I think there was 3, but
It was the blonde, like Carla, I think her name was. That he like when they go and steal the diamonds, steal the diamonds.
Oh, yeah, and that's another thing too. So
Yeah.
I can't believe I sort of forgot about that. But yeah,
It's a long movie. Makes sense.
Yeah, right. I know, and there's just so much to unpack with it too.
Or I think it's Carol, not Carla.
Carol. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, that scene was also pretty brutal too. It's almost hard to say that it would be more believable that something like that would happen during an armed robbery, but I don't know. It was still sort of not entirely out of the blue, but I wasn't really expecting it. Actually, when you watch it the second time, I had totally forgotten that part of the movie happened. I did remember the rape with Deborah. pretty vividly, unfortunately. But yeah, I totally forgot the thing that happened in the bank.
Yeah, he basically like rapes Carol too. Noodles does.
Yeah.
But she likes it kind of. It's interesting. I don't know. I don't want to speak on her behalf.
Yeah, it's definitely weird.
Yeah.
And she's kind of, I think, shown to be like a weird person later on when she comes back. So, yeah, that's not super clear what that was all about, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
still not the best behavior.
Yeah, like
Regardless.
Not condoned.
yeah.
But I
And-
do want to expand a little bit on what you said, Daniel, with like his relationships, because
This is huge.
like it is really interesting to see up until the certain point that he treats all of his female companions like shit except for Deborah, until he rapes her.
Until he can't get anything from her. Like, he's not getting what he wants out of her, yeah.
Right. And that's like I think the kind of his defining characteristic is like his like he hates authority and he hates being told what he can and can't do, which is kind of his central motivation throughout the movie, where like Max's motivations are purely about greed and power and upward mobility, and like Noodles is a bit more almost like a Dark Knight Joker-esque kind of force, where he's just kind of I'm here to do what I want to do, and that's really where like Max and Noodles come into conflict, or when Max is telling him to do things and he doesn't want to do it.
Yeah, Max like is almost envious or like jealous of Noodles. He like always wants what Noodles has. Like, and that starts from when you first meet Max, where he's on that carriage and they're about to like rob the drunk guy, and like
he steals the
pocket
watch from him.
Yeah. It's like he steals everything Noodles wants in life. He takes everything that Noodles wants. The pocket watch, all his women. He literally gets all the women in his life that he wants. So it's very interesting to see that contrast. And that's almost Max's motivation throughout the movie, I feel like. It's just like, all right, Noodles has this and this. I want all of this and more that he has.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah. And yeah, that's a pretty interesting point, because like, I guess comparing the two motivations between Noodles and Max, kind of like what you were saying, Jake, that Max appears to be mostly motivated by greed, by money and power and things like that. And as we later see, when he becomes a senator, there's that. So, and then with Noodles, basically, I guess like his criminal mentality is more like, you could say, like thuggish, if you will, as in like he's not really as like calculated as Max is. He's not really like thinking, super long term. He's sort of just wanting whatever it is in the moment.
Much more like
violence,
survival
money.
driven than
Yeah.
Max, who's like looking for stuff,
Like the
and
future.
like the
plotting,
accumulation
scheming.
of stuff. Or like, yeah, Noodles is kind of okay as long as he's just getting by.
Pretty much, yeah. And also he kind of seems like he doesn't really have a dream or anything like that. At least, he technically does, right? If you think the whole movie is like a dream sequence, but compared to Max, like that one conversation they have on the beach when they're in Miami, and Max draws that like the Federal Bank, whatever it is in the sand, and he says like, this is my dream, and then Noodles says, you're crazy, and this basically causes Max to snap, and which is like another thing that really doesn't get fully confirmed until like the very end of the movie, that there's a history of mental illness in Max's family. But yeah, it's funny they're like talking about grand larceny and like armed robbery and all that stuff at a very busy beach, and apparently that was totally fine. But but yeah, there was more thing I wanted to say too about like a difference between Noodles and Max. Kevin, I know you made an interesting point about like how, like, I guess Noodles is more possessive of relationships, and if you could say like people, if you will, and Max is more, he wants to possess, like, I guess, obviously more power, but also like money and things like that. His issue appears to be more like that side of things, versus Noodles is more like he wants like their soul almost to like be his, if that makes sense. I guess what I mean by this is like, one, that he hurts people in different ways, and
Yeah.
I guess like, yeah, and like you could look at it this way, like I don't know, because like, I mean,
It's almost
obviously
like
money is
control
like a
is more
sub-motivation.
important
Yeah, control
to
maybe.
Noodles
Yeah.
than
Yeah.
like Max just wants to have the power, but he doesn't necessarily do much with it. It seems like even when he's this millionaire senator, like a bribery scandal is about to take him down, so like he doesn't wield that power particularly well, and like Noodles has like no power, but exercises control in like a very forceful kind of way.
Right. Yeah. And also like, I'm glad you brought up that point too. I didn't really realize this until I looked it up later today, that the guy that they save from getting burned alive, I think he was like a news reporter, or he was some sort of journalist or something like that.
The union guy.
Yeah, the union guy. And what's interesting is his last name is Bailey, and then we see later in the film that Max has changed his name to Senator Bailey. And whether or not he took that influence from him, that individual, or he just, or this is also part of Noodle's dream, where he's like, okay, I knew this one guy named Bailey, and his brain basically just attaches that name onto this Senator Bailey person, who's actually, for one, not real, and then also is Max. But I don't know. I feel like there was something else I was going to say about like Noodles and like his motivations. I guess like going back to like the Deborah rape scene, or I guess before I get to that point, like, very early on, when I think it's probably like at least, the 1910s, 1920s or something like that, Noodles is looking through like this sort of like hole in the wall, if you will, or this like, rectangle
In the
piece.
bathroom.
Yeah, in the bathroom. And
Jennifer Connelly, young Jennifer Connelly, shout out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, her.
Did you know that, Jake?
No.
Yeah,
That was
I didn't know
Jennifer
that until
Connelly.
Kevin told me on Sunday. Yeah.
Well, Brandon brought it up, but yes.
Oh yeah.
Either way,
Yeah.
pretty crazy.
Yeah.
She was like 11
and,
when it was filmed.
Really?
Yeah, and a body
So
double
they were
was
probably
used
around
when
that
she.
age.
A body double was used when she pulls off her clothes. Because an 11-year-old
Yeah,
doing
that
that
was-
is
I would
pretty
hope
creepy.
so.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Even though it was the '80s, I mean, that still seems pretty, But
But sorry, go on, Daniel.
no worries. But yeah, so basically, when he sees Deborah, basically, like, it's, it's almost like he is experiencing like that first feeling of love, if you will. And Deborah obviously really cares about Noodles. She, I think she reminds him that he can't do this one particular activity on Passover. I forgot exactly what it was, or there was this one Jewish holiday they were celebrating. And then later on, she tells him basically that she won't be with him unless he leaves this life of crime. And then, obviously he leaves. but yeah, so basically when he sees her, he's getting like that first feeling of love, and that's like, I guess, where their relationship really first starts. And if you think about it this way, you know, like imagine if your Noodle situation, you know, I mean, I guess like how they kind of, you know, started the film, it was pretty creepy what he was doing. But anyway, like imagine you meet some girl and, you know, you sort of have this relationship, you know, you end up falling in love. And basically from that point until, I think Noodles is probably like at least in his 60s or 70s, probably late 60s, you know, early to mid 70s at the end of the movie. You know, basically like he's been in love for like this whole time. And then I think it's because, like you were saying, Kevin, how Max has sort of taken everything from Noodles, that he feels like Deborah is the like last thing, or maybe also the strongest thing that he has, or the biggest thing, the most personal and closest thing to him, and that when Max takes that, you know, this causes him to like snap and then do what he does, you know, and then, oh yeah, this is what I was going to say. So when we rewatched, when we rewatched the movie on Sunday, I saw one more scene that basically made me sort of like say, oh, like this kind of works with the dream theory. And that's basically when Noodles is in old age, he goes to go see Deborah perform, you know, on stage, and then he goes to her dressing room afterwards. And when we see Deborah, she's considerably younger looking than Noodles is. You know,
Yeah.
obviously she has aged, but a lot more gracefully, but she still looks at least like 20 years younger. You know, I think we might have talked about this when we were watching the movie.
Her makeup was not as advanced as DeNiro's in terms of old age makeup.
True. Yeah, there is that too.
Yeah.
And you know, and if I recall correctly, I think like her hair, like I don't remember seeing. There might have been some gray, I believe, but I don't exactly remember.
I don't remember.
But
I don't remember seeing any.
I don't think
Yeah.
there was any.
yeah, I don't think so either. But anyway, getting to the dream part. So basically, what made me sort of realize this is more of a dream is not only her like, you know, aging, but also the way that she reacts to Noodles when she sees him, because this is, you know, she sees him again after the rape happened, you know, likely maybe 20, 30 years later. And it's almost like she's not even, you know, because if something like that would have happened to you or to, you know, someone who went through something like that, you know, that'd probably be way too much for someone to handle. And I feel like, and she probably would have reacted a lot differently. And the way that we see her react is sort of like, almost like I don't know, like
it
as
never
if you
happened
were
almost.
yourself. Yeah, like almost like it never happened, like as if, you know, they didn't have that history. And she just sort of talks to him as if she's someone in his dream talking to him. It doesn't really feel totally real, at least in the sense that, you know, again, her reaction and also what they're talking about. It doesn't, you know, she seems completely unfazed about their whole history. I mean, not just the rape, but also like the times that he's gone to prison for a super long time and they weren't going to be together. And then, you know, his life of crime, obviously, and all of these things. It just really didn't seem to matter, I guess, to her in the end. But
Very
obviously
interesting.
it would.
Yeah.
Right? You know? Yeah. So
I-
there was that, and then there's also one more dream thing that I can talk about later. So
Well, let me
I know I
talk
kinda
about
went on
the.
there for a little bit.
You're good. You're good. Let me talk about the love thing too. Like I think that
Yeah.
sequence you're talking about. I think she's like still in love with him. She's like still cares about him, but it did kind of take me out of it when we were watching it, where it's like how is she not reacting to this guy that raped her, which is horrible. Like that's such a traumatic experience. That was interesting, and that's one theory that is brought up with the opium dream theory as well. Like, and again, the makeup. So yeah, good points.
So
But
I kind of read it in a little bit different way, that she had not necessarily forgiven him, for it, but had kind of just gotten through it on her own.
Like sort of moved
'cause-
on, if you could say.
Yeah, it moved
moved
on.
on.
Because he says something along the lines of do you have anything to say to me or something like that? And she says, like, I never thought I would see you again. And he says something, and then I can't remember exactly what the exchange is, but she's like, there's a difference between me not wanting to have to see you again and just not expecting it to happen. And she kind of implies that she just thought he was gone forever, rather than a active dislike of ever having to encounter him again, which I think is an interesting distinction, that she makes.
Very
Right.
interesting.
Yeah, and
But that
Yeah.
could also imply that that's what he would want her to say if he were
True.
concocting that in his,
But
fever dream.
He
or
doesn't
whatever.
apologize.
No, at all.
no.
Which is in character, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Again, it's like you want him to be the badass, but he's such a degenerate and such a terrible character.
Yeah.
yeah, and
interesting.
there's a little tinge of remorse there,
Yeah.
but again, he never really fully expresses it. And even with the final encounter with Max, he kind of has this little bit of you can tell he kind of that the guilt of believing Max had died, 30 or 40 or something years ago, had really weighed on him, through his entire life. But he never apologizes to Max for throwing him under the bus,
True.
either. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it's interesting. I do want to
Yeah.
just talk a little bit about that end sequence, too,
Yeah.
because it's the final confrontation. It's the culmination of not only the crime story, but the almost noir detective kind of thread through the 60s timeline of him trying to investigate who's coming after him or who found out who he is. It's like a political drama. There's just a lot packed into that 1960s timeline that culminates in their final meeting. And again, they do a really good job of this dichotomous relationship between the two of them, where Max is in this tuxedo and his office is beautifully adorned and stained glass windows and this big oak desk and all this fancy shit everywhere, and De Niro's in these raggy kind of jacket that he probably could have been wearing in 1930,
Yeah.
that he just kept with him the whole time. But they do a really good job of showing how Noodles is almost content with his life of solitude and
In hiding.
anonymity almost, for the 30 or 40 years that pass. And Max is at the peak of what he thought was achievable in his life, and he's absolutely miserable. And asks De Niro to kill him so he doesn't have to deal with the consequences of his actions, which I think is an incredibly poetic way to kind of set up the ending of the movie. And then, of course, Noodles walks away, which is probably the bigger diss to Max than actually following through and killing him, because he's no, it's screw you, go deal with your shit,
Yeah.
And it's kind of the opposite of what he did for him in the 30s, where he tried to save him then, and now he just kind of lets him get thrown to the wolves.
Or the auger.
Or the
Auger in the trash
garbage
compactor.
Oh yeah, that.
but yeah, it's a really interesting flipping of the script between those two events. It's really well done. I think bookends the whole story incredibly well.
Now, do you think
Agreed.
he killed himself in that garbage truck and jumped in, which is a horrible way to go?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. 'Cause like, in a lot of ways, Max is kind of a coward. And he hides behind Noodles quite a bit throughout
That's why
the movie.
maybe he goes after his life's possessions and
Right,
relationships
yeah, like he's
because
almost
it's
too
the
afraid
easy
to
way.
take the risk himself. He has to take
Yeah.
it from someone else, like something that's
Yeah.
proven that he can achieve.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, and like he knows that Noodles is there to protect him all the time. So when he does kind of take risks, it's always with Noodles right there to kind of pull him out or save him, you know.
And that's kind of like there's the scene, and we saw it in the trailer, and I mean it's one of my favorite scenes is where, we going back to that diamond heist and killing the guys that are like going to sell the diamonds, and De Niro's like, what's it going to be next? Is it going to be me against you or you against me? Like, what are they going to make you do? And it's like, fuck that, and I love that. That scene's so awesome.
yeah.
It
Yeah,
just
it,
shows
like, it
his
shows-
loyalty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like, and that's also like another scene where both Max and Noodle's friendship is like being tested. Basically like, next week Carmine tells you to kill me, or you're gonna do that. I'm not okay with that. And there's a couple other scenes too where that happens. Obviously then, and then also on the beach. And I feel like there was another scene too where that happened. I think. It was either when they were making the pact about, basically putting all the gang's money in a suitcase and then putting it in a safe deposit locker, or it could have been when they're all like, swimming on the river and Max basically gets into another boat and pretends like he drowned, which could be like a foreshadow into him faking his death. I don't know. Kind of interesting to think about it that way.
Yeah,
But,
definitely. I didn't think about it
Yeah.
that way. That's great.
Yeah, and like, and then also like him doing that, and then like not saying like, "I'm right here, Noodles." It's sort of like, it's not an outright betrayal, but it's sort of like dishonest, sort of, and
Yeah.
kind of like you were saying, Kevin, how like it shows they're like different characters. So basically, like Max is willing to throw everyone under the bus to like use people just to further his own ambitions, but like Noodles isn't like that, right? At least in that sense. And
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the briefcase too, because that's the first time where Noodles kind of shows hesitancy to blindly kind of go along with Max. Is they're all kind of putting their hands in to like, create their pact of money saving, and Noodles is kind of like, I don't want to really buy into this. And Max just kind of shoots him a look, and he's like, yeah, what the fuck, okay.
yeah, he's like,
And,
yeah,
like,
yeah.
and that kind of, I think, is really important because it's like a little glimmer that Noodles doesn't necessarily fully trust Max. And he understands that there's kind of this part of Max that will fuck him over if he gets the chance,
Right. It's sort of like that street knowledge. Like he sort of, doesn't really trust
Yes,
him like
yeah.
fully. So he's like, I can't really commit to this. And then also, if you look at it this way, like the beginning of Max and Noodle's relationship sort of started out as a lie. Basically, like how, Max is like, oh, this is my uncle, basically, and obviously
Yep.
it's not his uncle, and Kevin, I think you said too, like how that or Jake, I think you might have said this, like how Noodles will always protect Max, pretty much, sort of like how you would think like an uncle would try to protect his nephew. That's sort of like another cool way of looking at it. And then Jake, also like when you were talking about Max's like study or like his, this sort of, I don't know if you've ever seen like Moral Oral, but it's like pretty much Oral's dad. It's like an Adult Swim like claymation show. It's a comedy show. It's but yeah, basically he's in this big study, and then it kind of shows the difference between like Noodles sort of like living a life of like modesty, you could say, basically just living in hiding, and then Senator Bailey is obviously like this guy who's like exorbitantly wealthy. He's achieved everything in life, and basically when Max and Noodles meet again, in Max's mind, he sort of thinks, okay, Noodles ratted on me, and that would have got me killed, basically. He basically broke the, not La Cosa Nostra rule, but, like a mafia rule of not ratting. So he feels damaged, he feels hurt by that. And then Noodles is like, hey, you sent some guys to kill me, and thank God they didn't kill me, I was able to escape, and it's sort of like they're now even with each other, sort of in that sense. And, Max asks him to do that one last favor, is to, for Noodles to kill Max. And it's because Max is, not only because of his mental health issues, but also because he's so prideful and he's also like lived a life where he's pretty much beaten or eliminated every single enemy, every single threat that he's ever come across. Just because of his like intellect, you could say, or prowess in the criminal underworld. But so like he couldn't accept the fact of being killed by one of his enemies, but he can if it's a friend. And then Noodles is basically like hey, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm not going to do that for you. And then he just chooses to leave, sort of as like a kind of like fuck you to Max.
Definitely.
And yeah, and then there's a scene that happens after that also kind of plays into the dream theory that I want to talk about later. But
talk about it now
with the cars.
Yeah, well, yeah. So the garbage truck. So when I first watched this movie, I didn't really start to get like any idea that like this could really be a dream. For one, based on how many flashbacks and flash forwards we saw, but then like the ending scene when he's like looking up at the camera, that's where it kind of felt weird. And then, so basically, I had this idea. I was looking on Reddit, and a lot of people were having like the same theory. And then I tried looking for it, but I feel like, I don't know, I could have swore I saw it, but there is an outtake or something like that of when Max is walking towards Noodles, and then the garbage truck sort of like gets in the way, and then he sort of like fades away like a ghost. You could look at that sort of being like part of the dream theory itself, like him just magically disappearing. But I'm pretty sure I found, or at least saw, like a clip of Max actually jumping into the back of the garbage truck and getting blended up like a smoothie. But but yeah, I could have swore I saw that. But when we saw this movie the second time, I told Kevin, I didn't want to spoil anything, but I was like, we saw an earlier scene of that same garbage truck right in front of that same house, or maybe it was a similar house, but right in front of it. And I was like, don't forget this shot right here, because this will come up again later, and you'll kind of know what I'm like talking about.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So apparently, according to James Woods, that's the question he gets asked the most, is whether
Really?
Max died in the garbage truck. And to this day, he apparently has no idea. He's not sure if he did or not. So, well, pretty interesting.
Yeah.
I think the thing that lends more credence to the dream is that
Jumping on that
transition
theory?
of what?
You're jumping on the theory.
it's definitely plausible. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a lot that could lead you to interpret it that way. But it is
Opium's a
interesting
hell of a
when-
drug.
as the garbage truck is driving away, it kind of morphs into these two kind of like Rolls Royces or something from like the 1930s like
Yeah.
fancy cars full of people like popping champagne, wearing like fur coats and playing jazz music. And Noodles just kind of watches them drive by before he like starts walking away, which is very weird to happen in the 1960s. So that could just be some like weird kind of flashback thing that he has during this drug-induced dream, or I don't know. It's an interesting little sequence because
Yeah.
it's out of place for sure.
Yeah. I know, like, why are these 30-year-old cars, being now, like, still used in the 60s or whatever it is? It just feels, like, a little weird. And then also it kind of reminded me of another point, too. The song that's playing at the very last scene where Noodles is, like, high, staring up at the camera, I believe the song is called, like, Yesterday, I believe,
Yeah.
by the Beatles. Am I correct about that, I think?
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that song came out in like 1965, I want to say. Might have been like 65, 66, something like that.
Yeah, somewhere around there.
I'll look it up.
Which sort of kind of almost disproves that dream theory. But, I think they kind of leave it pretty ambiguous as to like sort of like what the ending means. You could look at it this way, like the ending could mean that Max just gets really high and then
65.
somehow 65. Okay,
Yeah. Sorry, go on.
yeah, no worries. But yeah, like you could look at the ending sort of being like Max gets really high and somehow either escapes or just somehow isn't found, which didn't really seem likely based on like, they were doing a lot to sort of find him. Like I think the lighter in someone's face, and then another guy pointed a gun at a guy who was like kissing his girlfriend or something like that. Mm-hmm. So you could either look at that he escaped and then it's actually happened, or you could look at that, he was sort of confabulating or at least like imagining a lot of these things that never ended up happening after.
Yeah,
the,
which like if he is kind of imagining it, and those guys are really after him, that means he probably gets gunned down in that opium den.
Probably.
right, which
That's
seems
what I was
more
thinking
likely.
too. Like he dies there for sure.
Yeah.
After he's
Yeah,
smiling.
like he dies there,
Fades-
and then what
cuts
happens
to black. Sopranos reference
Yeah, I
style.
was gonna say just
Yeah.
like The Sopranos. yeah, and
Except Tony lived.
You think so? Have you watched The Sopranos, Jake?
I want Tony to live.
I mean, same.
Yeah, I have watched it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I choose to
watched
live
it.
in a world where Tony is still wandering around New Jersey.
yeah, I
That's an
Yeah.
opium-fueled dream as well.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Overall, I like this movie. I think it's worth a watch, especially for it being 4 hours. It's worth at least one watch in your lifetime.
Yeah.
It's definitely a classic, and I recommend it. You could split it up and do two. There is an intermission, but it's like 3 hours plus into it. But you could do like 2 hours.
It's
and
not
then-
pretty
the
late
least
into it,
intermission.
yeah.
But, yeah.
Yeah. But overall, again, I like the movie. I would, I will maybe watch it again. I'm glad we did it for our podcast, especially with how iconic this movie is. I mean, it made no money at the box office, but it's Sergio Leone, and he's amazing. And I'm glad I was able to, because I've owned this movie for a long time on Blu-ray, and I've been wanting to watch it for a long time, and this podcast gave me the excuse to watch it. So I'm happy that we could do this one.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, I would highly recommend this movie. It's it's like you said, good for at least one watch. Maybe in like 10 years I'll watch it again.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean it's masterful on a lot of different levels. So yeah, it's really good, especially if you're just a fan of film. Like, it's just
Definitely.
there's so much to get from this movie.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm trying to think like closing thoughts. What I have left to say.
I want to hear them.
Yeah. Like. Yeah, I mean, I agree. I'd probably say, I mean, obviously, like, The Godfather Part 1 is my favorite mob movie, or actually, it's my favorite movie of all time, which, everyone has their own opinion. Some people say, like, Shawshank Redemption. Some people say, like, Titanic or whatever it is, or whatever movie.
For the best movie ever?
Yeah. It's a good one, but I probably wouldn't say the best movie of all time. But, yeah, this is definitely one of my favorite mob movies. I saw it a few years ago, and I did want to watch it again. And then when Kevin mentioned that, hey, I'm going to be watching Once Upon a Time in America and then doing like a podcast on it, I was like, oh, well, there's my excuse. Now I can, like, be more motivated to give up that much time to watch it. But yeah, I mean, really good movie, really good cinematography, really good set design. Again, like, the period pieces or not period piece, but the pieces they did of that period were amazing.
Yeah.
Like, everything looks so real, like, even to the, like the toilet, even like that Godfather Part 1 reference where, he's like reaching up towards like the toilet box or whatever, and it's almost like he's going to grab a gun, but obviously he's not. Like that, and I remember like there being like just sacks of like flour or something like that, and like crates and just like small stuff that really just
Little
sold
things.
that time period.
Yeah.
And the music,
Well, and
was
even
really good,
the
too.
transition of the same locations in multiple time periods is done so well. Like the sandwich
like how-
shop and
Fat Mo's
I
Bar.
think.
the train station, transitions from the like 30s to the 60s in like a beautiful way. There's a few different instances of that. They're just done so well.
Pretty wild that this movie
Yeah.
was not nominated for any Oscars. It's definitely deserved of nominations, I'd say. Apparently, the guy who was supposed to submit Ennio Morricone's score missed the deadline and fucked him over.
What a
What I
dick.
Really?
Yeah.
Which
but-
we didn't talk about that at all. And
I know. I was thinking about
I
that.
don't
just
want to
now.
burn a whole bunch of time on it, but like, wow.
Yeah, great score.
Wow, good.
But I like what you said, Daniel, just about how, I was saying, hey, I want to watch this movie and do the podcast on it. That's the whole, and you coming to watch it with me, which is great, and I'm glad you did. That's the whole
and thank you for
thing
having me.
Of course. That's the whole reason I'm making this podcast is to, granted, Jake and I haven't seen this movie and you've seen this movie, which is funny, but the whole gist of the podcast is for people of our generation and our age to watch these 80s movies and see why they're so great and why we want to review them. So, that's the whole point of this thing, and I hope everyone has enjoyed this episode. It's a long one, so is the movie. Buckle up, get in line. It's long. I appreciate everyone listening, and I think we'll catch you guys next week.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
actually,
next
Kevin,
week's going to be traumatic, so buckle up for that too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What were you gonna say, Dan?
Sorry. So I actually did think of this very last thing. Like kind of how I was saying, like it was my favorite mob movie of all time. You could also kind of look at it like it's a coming of age movie, pretty much, and kind of like what you were saying, just how
100%.
like throughout time, basically from the early 1900s to the 60s, you see how like these iconic places like Fat Mo's Bar goes from this like really busy, really amazing place that people love going to, and then now it's sort of like this dead diner, if you will, which is kind of cool. But yeah, it's very much. I kind of feel like it's if Stand By Me sort of followed them until they were like adults. That's kind of what this movie is about.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, a lot more dead bodies, obviously, but you know,
Gangsters. Yeah. I definitely. We'll have to look up some more 80s mob movies, see if there's any that fit the bill, and we'll have to do them, and we'll have you on again, Daniel. So
Yeah,
thank you for joining, Daniel. We appreciate it, and yeah, we'll catch you guys next week.
Yep. See ya.